What's going on, YouTube? Hey, so today we're gonna be feeding my worm bins, or just a couple of them, right? I'm not gonna feed everybody. So I got my compost and then my worm chow. All right, so we're gonna be dropping some into all three of these bins. These ones I'm just gonna lay it in there, just on top. This one, just getting it started, so we're gonna do a wedge feeding on that one. So a little bit about the compost, and I wouldn't say this is fully composted. I usually try to cycle my compost out every like 4 to 5 weeks, but it is pretty, I wouldn't say it's totally ready, but I mean, it looks like it's almost there. There's a couple things that aren't fully broken down. You see there's still some like stakes, which are obviously going to take a little bit longer. Got some leaves in here, a little bit of everything. Most of it is coffee grounds. Put some eggshells in there. All the things, anything that you would find in a restaurant kitchen or your own home kitchen. I compost it, pre-composted, so I can get it over to my worms. I know we've seen the worm chow on previous videos, but this is the mix. So what I'm gonna do here is just sprinkle a little bit on top. All right, get it in there. Depending on the size of the bin, usually dictates, or not necessarily the size of the bin, how many worms are in the bin is going to dictate how many spoonfuls I'm going to do here. So obviously you don't want it sitting there too long. I want the worms to be able to get through it. So about 3 in there. Alright, here's a big glob of worms right here. Make sure these guys don't fall out. Alright, so this bin, you notice is a dip in the middle. So the last video I did where we sifted those worm castings, I harvested them from this bin. So we're going to focus the feeding in this area, right in the center. And this little one on the end here, just started this one up with the African night crawlers. So we're going to wedge feed this one, so we're going to kind of focus in this area. See them moving over there. All right, starting to build some more bedding up in here for these guys, and that's why I really like the pre-composting a little bit better than just putting everything in the bin, is that it does a really good job of mixing the bedding and breaking it down before you get it over to the worms. All right, so you see in this one is a bunch of bedding of leaves, right? Great option, but when they're in the compost, they break down a lot better. All right, so you see them in here. It all in there, right? Versus over here, you still got some that are left over from some other feedings that I did, but yeah, getting that pre-compost in there works wonders. All right, so what I like to do is get my hand in there. Sometimes, especially working with a lot of coffee grounds, I collect them from some of the restaurants in the area. It's usually pretty clumpy, right? So even once I get to where I'm feeding the worms, you still find clumps of coffee. So whenever you're working with coffee, obviously you want the air to be able to flow through all the material. So whenever I'm doing, the compost and feeding it to my worms, I want to crumble it up, right? So in doing this, I want to try to get a pretty decent coverage of the worm chow that I put in, right? So think of the worm chow as like all the nutrients and everything that the worms needs, and then the compost is bedding and everything else, you know, that the worms would need, right? So the all the microorganisms and everything are going to be attracted to the compost, help break down the worm chow so that way it can be better accessible to the worms. Alright. So I don't want to put it on too heavy, right? Because we're still kind of in the middle of, well, towards the end of summer now. So what I found is that if you lay the compost on too heavy, it's going to start composting again and potentially kill your worms, right? So I try to keep it thin in the warmer weathers, and then once it gets a little bit colder, I can lay it on a little bit thicker. Right, but I make a lot of compost, and I can get a lot of compost for my worms, so I try to get through it, and they'll go through this, you know, 3 days. It should be pretty, you know, pretty worked through by the worms, and should be ready for another feeding. Alright, get the last of it in here. I'm just gonna sprinkle this on. This is all pretty much broken down pretty good, so just make sure it's a little bit more crumbly. Alright, just get that on there. Alright. Yeah, slow and steady, right? Don't overdo it because you run the risk of composting your worms to death, and nobody wants that. Alright. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Oh, you know what? It's not. One more step. So to help everything get a nice little jump start, I've got my water molasses here. So I'm not going to film it right now, but what I'll do is I'll just go through, and all these bins are pretty, you know, the moisture level is good on them, right? So I don't want to try to oversaturate it, but getting all those sugars from the molasses into the bins, helping the you know, all the organisms grow and, you know, be attracted to the compost, which, you know, obviously help the worms, right? The worms are going to go through and eat those. So that molasses water getting in there, yes, it helps with the moisture, but then the real purpose behind it is to get all those little organisms that the worms want to eat. All right. Yeah, if you guys are interested in how I make my compost, let me know, and we can do a quick little walkthrough on that. But yeah, like, subscribe, all the good things that, you know, everybody on YouTube talks about. Y'all have a good day.